Hello, greetings and welcome, my dear listeners. My name is Heretical Hatter, and I welcome you to this episode of Tau Empire Reimagined. And today we will be talking about the aftermath of the Fifth Coalition War, as well as the narrated ending of the relationship between Trazen the Infinite and Commander Ransi. Before we start, as always, I would like you to like, subscribe, leave a comment, and ring the bell. The whole shtick that every freaking YouTuber asks their listeners. You know what they say. Comments for the algorithm god, likes for the like throne. All hail the dark and terrible powers of YouTube and all that. But with our prayers to the darkest of gods out of the way, let's go straight into the narration of today's episode. Victory. What a silly sounding word. The legendary Commander Ransi looks down from the mountaintop towards the green forests of his homeworld. Green. By the stars, he hated that color. But this wasn't the green of the orcs, but of the trees. Far nicer in comparison. Yes, trees were far nicer than orcs. They didn't tend to scream, for one. They tended to be relatively quiet and didn't do much to stop anyone from walking through their territories. Yes, green of the trees was far nicer than green of the orcs. He still remembered how it looked by the time of liberation. A burnt wasteland. The orcs smashed everything. The forests, the hills, the cities, the rivers. Whole world was transformed into a disgusting parody of itself. A wasteland populated by mad, vicious and cruel monsters. And he was here as the last of them was wiped out. He witnessed how an entire world was systematically purged of the orc spores. Swarm of drones looking for the slightest sign of orc infestation, each armed with a flamethrower. Few decades have passed, and the talent of the Earthcast already ensured that so much has been healed in such short period of time. Trees grew once more and were full of life. Rivers were clear and full of fish. Ruins have been leveled and new cities built on old fundaments. The new generation would grow up properly, in happy families, breathing clear air, with no fear of green beasts hunting for survivors among the ruins. Ransi pushed the dark memory of the past away, smiling at the image of the present and hopeful for even brighter future.
70 years,
he whispered to himself with a chuckle.
Never thought I would live this long, nor that my story will end on the same world it has begun.
After decades of bloody war, Coalition has won. The orcs were vanquished. The Aundi and her puppets disappeared alongside the last of the green orc war bosses. He changed the course of the coalition history, hopefully for the better. Not that he cared. Not anymore, at least. He was old and tired and alone. Heroic Haresh, stoic Monsu, even that sassy avant-hack, they were all gone, lost to the pass of time or blade. He was the last of the great heroes of the Northern War. Many heroes of the Southern Front were dead as well. Either orcs or time found them sooner or later. Ransi was a relic of the bloodiest and most devastating war in coalition history, a living monument to its victory, and the price they had to pay to achieve it. He never found a partner, a soulmate, never found a place where he could truly settle down and finally rest. War was in his blood. Night or day, he couldn't escape it. He wasn't sure if he wanted to. War made him into a man he was, into a living legend he was, into a myth he will become. Here, on top of a mountain, where he could see his homeworld, healed and rebuilt from the madness of the green tide, he felt that his work here was done, that he deserved to rest. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He wasn't alone.
Took you long enough,
he muttered before opening his eyes and turning left, smiling from ear to ear. The clear air broke into pieces, a figure of Trazen appearing before him, the metal mask returning the smile.
I am still amazed how you know that I am nearby, no matter what trick I use.
Necron chuckled to himself.
You should have got used to that already.
Ransi laughed, making some space on the rock he was sitting on.
I guess I should.
Trazen walked over and sat next to him. They sat there for a long time, basking in the light of the sun, both of them looking out into the wide world that was slowly healing from the cruelty and savagery of the war that just ended. Ransi took another deep breath.
Good. Very good. They will be able to figure out things from here,
he said before standing up and turning to his friend.
So, I guess it's time.
Trazen nodded.
That it is.
I guess I should have guessed that you wouldn't let me die of old age.
Ransi chuckled.
I wouldn't invest so much in your safety and kept you alive if I didn't plan on taking you in, now would I?
Trazen asked, spreading his arms defensively. Ransi shrugged, feeling the fabric made of living metal perfectly protecting his body, and nanomachines within his veins keeping his cells alive despite his age.
No, I guess you wouldn't.
They both chuckled. Two old friends joking around because they felt comfortable in each other's presence. Ransi nodded his head.
Fine. They have no need for this old broken blade. I am fine with my story ending here,
he stated, satisfaction in his tone.
You gave me a lot of great stories, Ransi. But you, yourself, will be one of the greatest pieces I will have pleasure of holding in my collection.
Trazyn assured.
Whatever you say, you metal skeleton.
Old Tau laughed.
Just dust me off from time to time, and if you want to talk, you will know where to find me.
He placed a hand on Trazyn's shoulder.
Just make sure to brew some tea.
Commander Ransi was proclaimed dead as he disappeared in the mountains of Zervera after he went on a walk. His body was never found. For generations, he would be known as a hero. Coalition Special Forces, the Lancers, would see him as their founder and greatest example to follow. They couldn't have known that as they mourned and praised his memory, the ancient Tau was walking with his old friend through the great galleries, taking in the wonders that his people couldn't even start to comprehend. Before he took his place among the collection and be frozen in time. At least for now. For even though Ransi was but a broken blade when going into stasis, an ancient Tau saying echoes true. Even when broken, a sword may still cut. To say that the victory in the Fifth Coalition War was bitter would be an understatement. Dozens of worlds were invaded and suffered catastrophic losses, being infected by the orc spores, which would take very long time to eradicate, if they will be eradicated at all. 3 Sept worlds were lost and reconquered, but it would take decades, if not centuries, to bring them back to previous splendor. 13 worlds were lost and couldn't be recovered in any way, shape or form. Those worlds were destroyed by either orcs and their madness, or coalition in desperation, which didn't change a fact that numerous worlds were in need of reconstruction. Fifth Coalition War eclipsed all others in scale, brutality, and amount of suffered losses. The coalition managed to survive, but just barely. They were on the verge of collapse many times, and only diligence of the greatest of heroes did coalition manage to survive. It was clear to everyone that desire to expand too fast was foolish, First Orc invasion wasn't a freak accident. There were more of the bastards out there, and Coalition had to be prepared. As such, after a long time of Reconstruction finished, now ancient ethereal, Aun Sai declared the end of a third sphere of expansion and start of the first age of security, when great reforms and changes put during the Age of Reformation would take its full effect. In 136 years of Reconstruction, there were many changes and reforms to the coalition, as numerous factions bickered about to either continue or end the expansion and what to do next. Changes that happened were reformation of the coalition government. Coalition was divided into more defined regions of control that had more internal freedom and ability to grow on their own. It was controlled weakening of central government by the ideas of Aun Sai, who dislike control freaks like Aun Di and Aun Tor, who caused a lot of damage in relations between members of a coalition. Those reforms assured that non-Tau won't be treated like second-class citizens. Coalition became more fair, and while caste system and general control was still in place, there was more equality among the people of the coalition. Next was reformation of the military. The Fifth Coalition War forced to change the military of the coalition. In general, entire society became far more militarized. Training and preparation for war became a norm. War games, where coalition would train against each other and imaginary enemies, would become a tradition for the military and good way to have a good rivalry between the septs. Non-Tau species had now easier time going through ranks. With general militarization, forces that were before independent became more connected to the coalition military. Self-defense forces tasked in defense within a system. Protection forces, mobile response defense forces. Liberation forces were mobile offensive force. Lancers took the role of the special forces. Merchant forces were mostly merchant fleets. And exploration forces, with exploration fleets. The biggest change was adding of merchant and exploration forces. For the most part, they remained a civilian part of the government, but with general militarization, now merchant fleets were better armed. Same for exploration fleets. They were weaker than liberation or protection forces, but in case of a war, they could be easily called to a fight. Additionally, two new doctrines were developed during the war and adopted by the coalition military. Hundali, the biting swarm, created by legendary Avant-Hak. Numerous small units dedicated to taking down of bigger target by bleeding it to death by 1,000 cuts. A naval doctrine for the most part. Otoshi Atha, pitfall barrier, created by Zoat commander Ransi, a doctrine where defenses would be set up in checkerboard pattern, one position strong, one weak, which would make enemies break intentionally weaker points and go into well-prepared kill zones, which later could be surrounded by fast-moving units. A ground doctrine for the most part. Another great change was establishment of secret gene-modifying program by some ethereals. Seeing their filing influence, but also aware how the coalition managed to survive thanks to a few very talented individuals, ethereals began a secret gene-modifying program, one that went against their previous ideas of not influencing Tau DNA too much. But now, they were purposely breeding, cloning, and DNA modifying their own species and others of the coalition in the name of possessing a talented commander on hand in case of any future war on a scale as great as the Fifth Coalition War. Next great change was the ending of the ban on warp drive and psychic choirs. During the war, psychers created choirs to help coordinate the war, just as warp-capable vessels allowed for quicker response to orc attacks. As such, Coalition made it official that psychic choirs would get some support, despite new forms of communications being established, for the sake of helping with coordination, as well as shipyards building warp-capable vessels will get more funding in the future. It's important to note that the Coalition was very careful with psychers. Some xenospecies had almost natural ability to communicate on the long distances, like the Domati, and they were mostly tasked with training and helping to protect those who would open themselves to the treacherous warp. The fact that the psychic choirs were tolerated doesn't mean that they became new form of communication in the Coalition. The courier ships still played the major role, despite some new developments in terms of long-range communications. Next great reform was in colonization doctrine. Before, Coalition was establishing only full colonies. What does that mean? A full colony is a fully self-reliant colony on well-prepared worlds. Faced with damage of a Fifth Coalition War and need for reconstruction, it was agreed that outposts with very specific tasks will be established, even on unprepared worlds by the older definition, all to boost productivity and wealth of a coalition for the sake of rebuilding. Same for establishing worlds that would focus on industrial production, without being self-reliant. However, the old rule of self-sufficiency was kept in anyway, that outside of systems with only outposts, each individual star system must be self-sufficient. The worlds that were part of the coalition were now divided into 4 main categories, with many subcategories within them. First category is Sept World or Capital World. This is a capital of a Sept or of a member species. It's important to note, a Sept World isn't a Sept. Sept World is a capital of a Sept. Those worlds were heart of administration and symbolic heart of any given sept or member species. They didn't need to be most populated or most industrial. Many had symbolic meaning or were dedicated to one thing when neighboring worlds were taking care of industrial production. The next category are mandates. Mandates were worlds usually take a role of a massive city or industrial world that cannot sustain its own population with their own resources, and same goes for resources needed for the factories. They were established in response to realization that there will be need for far greater industrial production during a war compared to that of Fifth Coalition War. Mandates are almost always established within a system where there are outposts that can supply them and feed its factories or population. Next category is a colony, a self-sustaining world. Some can be more industrial, some more agricultural, but by the new definition, a colony is a world that is self-sustaining in terms of food and industrial and militaristic production. Final category is an outpost, a world which is fully focused on delivering one or two goods to the coalition. Agricultural outposts produce only food. Military outposts allow for training soldiers in harsh conditions. Research outposts take care of technology and research. Mining outposts bring resources to the factories, etc., etc. Outposts aren't self-sustaining and have a need for supplies from other worlds to ensure that all needs of their citizens will be satisfied. There was also a secret or additional category that wasn't officially recognized. The space stations that would become extremely popular in the future of the coalition. Many would be considered a part of a world which they orbit, but many were, semi-independent within a system. They took care of mining, building ships, and other tasks, but in this and future periods of time, they would grow in size significantly. Some with population counted in thousands, like hundreds of thousands. Some could say that those space stations that started to appear in this period of Reconstruction were a prelude to the mega projects and mega constructs that the Tal would be known for in the 40k galaxy in not so far future. Many important changes came from Secrets of Carmageddon. With the Space Hulk in their hand, Coalition got access to parts of archaic technology. Sure, vast majority was damaged or defied by the orcs, but some data and mechanisms did survive and could be at least partly recovered, which allowed for further research and advancement in coalition technology. The second greatest technological advancement in this period of time was the third generation of ether drive. Now ether drive had 1/3 the speed of a standard warp drive, making it 32% faster than the second generation and 65% faster than the first generation ether drive. This advancement would prove essential in future expansion and especially in upgrading of the protection and liberation navies. However, the greatest technological advancements of them all in this period of time was Ether-Comms Relay, the first generation. Since the very first meeting with Nikasar and getting access to Ether Drive, Tau Earthcast tried to create a reliable comm system that could travel faster than light. So to not use courier ships that were only as fast as the ships themselves. Even with the mass majority of courier ships having a Nikasar or other psychic species pilot that could help with navigation and boosting the speed of each of those vessels by a great margin, they still were quite slow, and long-range communications from one border of the coalition to the other still took weeks, if not months. But now, thanks to the technology and theories that they were developing already, and discoveries within the Space Hulk, Coalition managed to create the very first generation of Ether-Comms Relay, allowing them for FTL communications. Very important thing. This technology wasn't discovered on the Space Hulk. The research was already ongoing and was going for thousands of years now. This Space Hulk simply possessed pieces of technology and data that allowed to fill up the blanks of certain theories that allowed for this massive breakthrough. Ether-Comms Relay is a system based around massive space stations which send precise signals to another space station with Ether-Comms Relay that could understand it. This is very important. For Ether-Comms system to work, you needed two space stations that were sending signal to one another. The signal from the space station couldn't be sent to let's say, an individual ship or even a planet. A message had to be sent from this specialized space station to another specialized space station. The systems and mechanisms that allowed for FTL comms were very specific and very expensive. You couldn't just place them on any simple ship. And tests with placing those instruments on the world, on the planet, proven to be more difficult, as if planets themselves were causing problems with communications. So, a space station to a space station only, very specific type of FTL communication, and only from that, those space stations could send normal signals, let's say, within a star system. Or hell, even through a courier ship. Some people that are fans of 40k might think that I am giving something that basically no other species or faction in 40k has. FTL communication that aren't psyker based. But I tried my best to make it as balanced as possible. This isn't like in Star Wars with holograms, that you have a little disc, you click, and hey, I have communication with the whole galaxy. If now I'm not mistaken, in Star Wars, hyperspace communications are mostly possible because there are automatic space stations within hyperspace that, keep the tunnels of communications open. That's how you can communicate through, the entire galaxy. Here in 40k, that wouldn't work. The skip drive, the ether drive, works like, taking a stone and throwing it on the water surface, allowing it to skip on the surface. And if you have navigators like, let's say, Nikasar or Domati, they can help you to choose, a path through that surface that your jumping, your skips, will be far more efficient if you do so without them. In case of Ethercom system, this is like sending a message, that is, a type of energy on that surface level without, skipping. Because if it skips, it can go all over the place. So the Ether relay system has very short range by galactic standards. It's not like, I will place this one here and I have contact with entire coalition space. No. The coalition will have to build hundreds and then thousands of those space stations to have a reliable way of FTL comms within their own territories. That's most important. There is no ether communications unless you have ether relay. So, as long as it's used within the coalition territories, where those real systems are already established, this will work. But in, let's say, offensive war, the communications will be cut. And the most important limitations of all, you need to have those space stations for the system to work. This translates to, if you destroy this, station, the communications are cut. Even more, if you cut enough of those stations from the network of real stations, you can cut the communications, FTL comms, within the coalition into pieces that cannot reach one another. Like one psychic choir within the Imperium can reach any other choir. I mean, most likely. The word might be fuckery and be problematic with, translation and interpretation of the message. But a psychic choir can reach any other psychic choir. And sure, if you destroy this psychic choir, you have no chance of communicating with any other choir, because you don't have your own. But in case of Ethercom relay, if you have 3 those space stations, the first have reached to the second have reached to the third, but the third doesn't have reached to the first. If you destroy the middle one, the second, the comms are cut between them. So, adding to the fact that Earthcast worked on this concept for 2,500 Terran years. 2,500 years. Earth years, human years, to develop this technology. I feel justified that the madmen of Earthcast most likely could figure out this in 2,500 years. It also keeps with the Tau Empire, or in this case, Tauba Coalition theme quite well. That the coalition is using interesting new technology that is vulnerable in one way but more reliant in the other. Sure, this FTL comm system has a very limited range, and the great weakness that you have to have chain of space stations to have contact on the really long range communications between multiple star systems. That's true. However, unlike psychic communications, when you send this message, it will arrive at the second, third, and fourth space station on time, and there will be no problems with interpretation because the message itself won't be warped by the warp. I feel that I managed to balance this system out. It has its strengths and it has its weaknesses, both that can be very powerful and ones that can be very easily exploited. It balances each other out. Also, the great limitation is that you need to have a space station. If you are in the system that doesn't have the space station, well, you will have to wait for courier ships. This still speeds up the communications by a great deal, because courier ship doesn't need to go from the original place of the event or sending the message, only from the nearest relay. But still, I feel that this makes Coalition more interesting, that they both have FTL comms, Psyker choirs, and courier ships. It makes them more interesting, in my opinion. Sorry for mumbling, let's get to the two final points. The final advancement in technology was teleportation. Coalition scientists finally managed to figure out teleportation, at least in principle and general mechanism how it works. Some of the coalition members already had semi-working examples of this technology: Tarelians, Mekians, and Zoats among them, but had no idea how to recreate it. This was one of the lost pieces of technology, ones that were very well protected because there were only examples that existed at the time. But finally, with some pieces of Crampageddon, secrets of teleportation were rediscovered. And although very expensive, like extremely expensive and far from reliable or satisfactory to the coalition standards, this was the very first step for the coalition to figure out how to make new teleportation systems. With how dangerous and unreliable this technology was, the teleportation was completely overshadowed by Ethercom relay and third generation Ether drive. But this was very important technological advancement that would prove very valuable in the millennia to come. And final point is official alliance with Sion Empire. Although Cetorians didn't desire to join the coalition, they were quite okay with the alliance. The cultural differences and also the distance between them made the, union between the two close to impossible. But after the victory over orcs, the relations were very positive. So as the coalition decided that they will end the expansion and focus on the internal build-up, the Sion Empire started their own expansion towards the coalition borders, keeping good allied relations and trade deals, and most importantly, working together very hard on hunting any orcs that were in that region of space. Well, my darlings, I think that's it. The consequences of the Fifth Coalition War and official ending to the third sphere of expansion. Coalition decided to stop expanding their territories and focus on building up their own possibilities and size and power within the existing borders. They managed to discover and, create amazing new technologies that would prove, very important in the future. The age of expansion has come to an end. The first age of security is about to begin. But how secure was this age of security? And how Coalition welcomed the beginning of the 40th millennium and the 6th millennium of their own history is a subject for a future episode. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, comment, subscribe, ring the bell, the whole shtick. If you have any questions or suggestions, please leave them in the comments below. Thank you for joining me today, and I hope you enjoyed. Now, my dear listeners, remember, wherever you are, whatever you do, try to enjoy yourself while you can. I wish you a most critical day. Ta-ta!